Yes, everything is well. I can see you and the PowerPoint.
Okay, perfect. So you can let in people like in within a minute when we start.
Yes, doing it now.
Great.
Okay, everybody is in now.
Excellent. Okay, welcome everybody to the session on Europe, Western Balkans, COVID, and mainly the impact of COVID-19 on the Western Balkans. So, firstly, to start like with some technical guidelines because it's quite complicated to host a webinar while we have like lots of participants. So, just like to make some rules clear. For the ones that have joined the meeting via team meetings, then please do turn off your microphone, because if your microphone is on, then afterwards the other like participants might not be able to hear me as well as you can hear me. For the participants that join via team meetings, also like please like bear in mind that you can ask questions at the end, but those questions at the end of course like will be via audio, and depending on your preference you can present yourself when you ask the question, or you don't need to present yourself. uh, for the ones that are joining via the YouTube channel, the YouTube channel link is online and it's on the ACSS website. So it's on the Live Stories channel. And please follow the link that is online. Otherwise, the questions there, I will only like take them via the YouTube chat because I cannot hear you. But then please bear in mind that the audio questions will have priority over the chat questions. For all of the participants, like in both platforms, like it's important to understand that this is an open lecture, and as an open lecture, it will be recorded and afterwards like posted online. So please like keep in mind also like when for instance like the questions are asked and so on. Sometimes if you have questions that require more in-depth answers, please do not hesitate to email me. You can you will find my email address online as well. um, uh, Questions that will be regarding like the security risks more in depth or so on, I'll be happy to answer them. um, okay, I think we covered everything regarding the the technicalities of the talk. So now let's continue like with the presentation itself. Hopefully this will last like around half an hour, and then like we can, or perhaps even longer depending like on how important it is. So I hope that everybody like can stay put, and despite that it's probably lunchtime and everybody's having lunch as well. First of all, I would like to ask you. I would like to ask you, like, to think why are we discussing about Western Balkans, and this is like very important, I think, because first of all, like it's important from the perspective of the Western Balkans, but also from the perspective of Europe. Like the pandemic of COVID-19 has impacted like both the developed and the developing countries in the same way, more or less. Of course, the responses have been different. So the responses like in the Western Balkans have differed a lot, like for instance from the Western European states, because they have taken stricter measures. For instance, like most of the states, they have instated the emergency status, and some of them also, some of them except Montenegro, Montenegro has not done so. So I think that's very, very interesting to start with, that the measures firstly like were very different. Like from the beginning, like they have stopped the traveling. They have also like created a ban on traveling, and also on freedom of movement. Curfew has been instated as well. So many of the measures have been different from some of the Western European states. For instance, like Netherlands, which has taken, from that perspective, a more lenient approach. When it comes to the number of the infected individuals, and also the death rates, Serbia has the highest, and then followed by Bosnia, North Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, and the lowest affected country is Montenegro. The numbers are higher than 2000, for instance, for Serbia, which has been highly impacted by COVID-19. The main question now is how will this actually impact the region? Because COVID-19 is a pandemic that has actually impacted all of the world. But then also, how will it impact the region in transit that is choosing between autocracy or democracy? According to the recent Freedom House report, 2 of the countries in the region have already been considered as not any longer as democratic. Those are Serbia and Montenegro. So changes have been moving towards more autocracy in the region, as we can see, also from the Freedom House report. So now we will also analyze certain issues that are important, for both, not only for Serbia and Montenegro, but also for other countries, and whether the other countries may be also turning towards more autocratic regimes or democratic regimes, which is important for the stability of Europe as well as Netherlands. To turn to the topic, firstly, the main aim, as I described, is to raise awareness of the possible issues relating to COVID and insecurity for both Europe and as well as the countries themselves. We will discuss each case study, so each country, starting with Serbia, then afterwards Bosnia, Kosovo, Albania, North Macedonia, and Montenegro. The case studies will map the internal and external risks. So mainly it is about actually mapping the internal security risks and external security risks, which essentially this mapping would serve for early warning and countering and preventing instability and building peace. At the end of the presentation, we will also provide some mitigation strategies to counter and prevent instability and hybrid warfare in the region. The methodology is based on mixed methods, so we use some big data in order to inform the structural trends in the region, as well as news and academic outlets and social media. We also added some qualitative data as well, live story interviews, to more understand the local context and to understand the perceptions of the local people and what are the hidden motives of the local people and perspectives. The main idea behind it is that there's theoretical approaches that especially in international relations and global politics, that perception is a reality. So we have certain theories such as constructivism that deals with it and then argues that the behavior of individuals as well as states is according to the perceptions rather than the facts. The similar ideas are within the academic community also, regarding the identity politics. That is very important, where some academics argue that identities cannot be changed, but then other academics argue that identities as well can be changed, so we can create communities. So for instance, there is this theory of imagined communities. So for instance, the the identities of certain groups and communities can be strengthened or changed towards a moderate idea. Geopolitics as well plays an important role on on reality and on mainly like in global politics. We understand that there's very important like to maintain like the balance of power between like the rising powers, or by now we would call them the main powers in the world, because we are in a multipolar world nowadays. And how does this impact? It is very important how it impacts Europe and also Western Balkans. I think the most important term is hybrid threats or warfare, which is like more the asymmetrical warfare that is presented nowadays. And the asymmetrical warfare is mainly like based on the idea of changes on the warfare. We have changed from the traditional warfare to more hybrid warfare, which aims to destabilize the countries, to undermine countries, the trust in those countries via different tactics, like to distort, to dismay different countries, but also like to create like gray operations that are under the legal threshold, therefore they cannot be easily traceable and identifiable to the target source. This is like, we would call it, this is a new modern warfare, and this is much more difficult to be fought because it's new and it's changing and it's very cheap, and many other countries are using it. So for instance, Russia is known for it, but also like other countries, which could be also like China considered as such. Now to start like with threats within the Western Balkans. So what are the main threats in the Western Balkans? We have like 6 main countries that we will analyze in the Western Balkans, and we will firstly start with Serbia. When we look at the internal security and internal security of Serbia, I think it's important like to look at different domains of the progress of the state. We will look at the political, legal, security, economic, and societal. Politically, in Serbia, for instance, it has been considered that the country has moved for the first time since 2003 from a democratic country to an autocratic country, according to the Freedom House report. Also, we understand that, for instance, the European Commission reports have been also critical towards like the Serbian system, towards political orientation of Serbia. Especially, for instance, it was visible when they discussed like the freedom of press and freedom of media. At the same time, like what is very interesting also to analyze that during COVID-19, Serbia has taken many measures that have been considered by many countries or journalists like internally not adequate. For instance, the lockdown has created lots of criticism among the communities within Serbia, and because the lockdown has been like complemented with many arrests and also with many trials. And those trials essentially led to fines, to punishments that are very severe, sometimes up to 8 years. And that was very problematic. So the civil society has rejected the lockdown measures that have been taken by the state of Serbia, even though it is under emergency. There has been also like high criticism about like surveillance and about violations of privacy data, especially like from the individuals that have been infected, because they are being like traced by GPS, but also they are being like checked in person by the police. So also legally, as you can see, like there's a backward impact in this because of COVID-19 in Serbia. Um, Moreover, like we can discuss more about the security risks. About the security risks, like from the former studies of the former years, like we know that the internal situation in Serbia has been highly problematic. So, for instance, the internal situation, like when we discuss, for instance, the minority rights, there have been claims from, for instance, the Albanian minority rights, like in the south, that they have been declared stateless. Then afterwards, like you have had also like certain areas, such as in Novi Sad and so on, like for requesting for independence. Some voices here and there, as well as you have had like other security threats that are, I think, important to discuss. One of the biggest security threats that is impacting, I think, Serbia and generally, I think, the region, as well as it's increasingly related to Europe, is far right. When we discuss about the far right, we mean mainly like we discuss like mainly like the far right extremist groups that are promoting anti-democratic principles. In this case, like we have uncovered that, for instance, New Zealander attacker, he has been inspired and by the Serbian nationalism, and generally he has traveled also like to Serbia before committing the attack in the New Zealand, and also like he has been very vocal against the US, as well as, again, because of the NATO bombardment against Serbians, Christians, in order to liberate the Muslims, meaning Albanians, in Kosovo. In this case, like that was one of the first facts that the global far right is linked to also like Serbia. But then afterwards, like what is very important to mention about the far right also has been strengthened by funding by Russia. So they have been, for instance, gangs that have traveled around not only Serbia but also Bosnia, and also you have seen them also in Czech Republic. That they have they have been like motorcycle gangs that have just traveled around the country and also promoted like propaganda towards like ideas that are more far right. What is very interesting, it is that also recently the far right in Serbia is also like collaborating with the far right also in Germany. So there's links that are being created also in the European level. For instance, one of the AfD leaders in Germany has also traveled to Serbia in order to strengthen the ties, and recently they have organized also like summits in order to create like a global far right, and in this case like mainly like a link between Berlin, Moscow, Belgrade, and Paris. I plan to show a video, so let's see whether we can see this video. If it opens, because the computer is slow. But I would really like to show the video, so you can have an idea of what I'm speaking now about this. Okay, I think because I'm streaming in both YouTube and also Microsoft Teams, this is that would be difficult to show it would be difficult to show the video. So I'm just going to continue with the presentation. Yeah, so the video was attempting to show an individual that has been known to be collaborating with the far right extremist groups that have been also reported as part of the surveillance of the German intelligence. Which shows that there's clear links between the far right in the West, in Germany specifically in this case, as well as in Belgrade and Croatia, which is very important to mention because also Croatia is another EU member state that seems to be involved as well, on far right rhetoric. What is interesting to mention also about the security risks in Serbia is that except the far right that has been financed also by Russia, and also we understand that the political elite that is now present in Serbia has been also part of the establishment of '99, so not many changes have happened, and former ideas are still present in the political discourse. There's also state government lectures that have been provided during COVID-19 on history, and those state government lectures are trying to rewrite the history that Serbia collaborated with the Nazis, and Nazis have been having the right ideology as because fascism is acceptable nowadays. So this is very important. Those online lectures are online publicly available and are given by the also given based on the Ministry of Education, and one of the links also can send you there. In the presentation there's a link. So we can see also that there's also governmental support towards the far right rhetoric. At the same time, I think Serbia has other risks that are highly dangerous. For instance, religious radicalization is prevalent in the Novi Pazar area. So essentially, mainly targeting the Bosniak Muslims there. Then there has been research on online radicalization, and during the COVID-19, we've seen high level of presentations online, sometimes also in that area, but also in Montenegro and in Bosnia, followed by more than 30,000 participants online. This shows that the reach is quite high because 30,000 participants online targeting the Bosniak Muslims in the region, or also the Albanians that do speak BCS, then it's a high amount of number to join a lecture that is radical, really Islamic radical. In this case, I think those are also online lectures that sometimes you can see, and you can also follow Facebook groups where they during COVID-19 also announce events for Salafism especially openly, and you can join if you wish. So we can see those are some of the risks, and afterwards we have of course the national rhetoric that and people's support towards Russia, and high level of disinformation that has been also committed being implemented there. Only Twitter last month has taken down more than 84,000 trolls. And this is just the beginning, because we know that disinformation warfare will become more problematic in the future with the innovation in artificial intelligence, where the Russia would not need any longer humans to produce texts, and they can actually create much more impact in order to influence the minds of the people in Serbia and the rest of the region. Mainly Russia is active, mainly in Kosovo and Bosnia as well, and Montenegro is attempting to. So there are like many security risks that are involved in internally in the in Serbia. Economically as well, Serbia has suffered from COVID-19, and according to the World Bank, there will be like up to 5%, 5% of GDP loss in the future. So that also like is quite problematic, because as you can see, like 5% would actually come back to their economic levels that would strike it quite highly. Then societally, as I explained, there's a polarization between Bosniaks in the south, as well as Albanians, and you have also like a polarization among Serbs, because like you have the disinformation warfare, Putin traveling frequently, as well as like as an example, like you have also tabloids that are very much like favoring like a polarized system. To move towards external risks. So external risks, like we mentioned a bit, geopolitical influences. For instance, Russia. Russia has been a proxy, as you can see, Serbia is a proxy, is using Serbia as a proxy, and then we discussed also that they are supporting the far right extremism. They have had infrastructure in the country, and also are trying to recruit they are trying to recruit the youth as well, which is unemployed. What is very interesting that we didn't discuss so far in terms of geopolitical influences and insecurity is like China. So China has also like been very active. China has done most of the projects like in Serbia rather than in the rest of the countries, and it is considered Serbia is considered China's hub in the region. As a hub, they have invested like mainly in infrastructure, but also they have invested in technology, so mainly digitalization. What is very, very interesting is that the leader, why, for instance, Serbia is very close to China, is because also the leader styles are very alike. They're very much having autocratic tendencies, but also the economic amounts and benefits like that they have been received, for instance, like during COVID-19 from China, have been quite high in comparison, like for instance, the benefits that they have received from Russia or from the EU. And also the recipients, so for instance, the ceremony that was held when China brought six medics in Serbia, was that the Vucic kissed the flag of China. So this actually shows that there's a strengthened relation, like during COVID-19, also between China and Russia. We already know that in terms of insecurity, like China is assisting also Serbia to take control of the state, to create a surveillance state, because they have also a new program that they call TAC. It's supposed to give like 250 cameras in Belgrade, but also like it's initially in order to fight crime. But then the final usage of the data by those cameras that probably will be added in the future to fight crime, it is argued by the critics and NGO leaders that it is mainly to surveil the opposition and suppress them in order to create like an autocratic state. Then we have also Turkey that is using like the minorities, mainly by engineering and working with their Muslim identities. Like Sanjak region, for instance, requested aid by Turkey, as well as the rest. So what does this mean actually, like for Europe, the EU and NATO? For Europe, it means that one of the geopolitical competitor power, like both actually, which are China and Russia, are becoming closer like to Europe, and they are using like Serbia as a proxy place to be installed in the future. For the EU, it means more than essentially they should be careful on the negotiations processes that they have opened, and to understand like the credibility of of Serbia as a potential future member that would harmonize its European foreign and defense policy, so they would harmonize it. However, without having a clear European foreign policy and defense policy towards Russia and China, we do not know how Russia will move forward, how Russia and also like Serbia will move forward EU. Um, Regarding NATO, of course, like Serbia is not aiming to join NATO, but it is important like to understand like the developments in the region, because this also impacts like the future of NATO, as Croatia is a member state of NATO, and they are very close to each other, and Serbia is like almost surrounded by member states. For Netherlands, also it means that they need to be carefully engaged. So, firstly, like for this country, it means that early warning conflict prevention are important rather than essentially reacting to this, because it's like cheaper, and now like would be a turning point to react. Now, we're going like to the next country in the region that is more problematic, which is Kosovo. Kosovo, similarly, is experiencing internal risks as well as external risks. I will try to be a bit faster in order to get some questions as well. So, we are moving towards Kosovo because basically Serbia is also impacting Kosovo. And how we will see, like in spheres, for instance, in spheres of the political domain, the Pristina-Belgrade dialogue is impacting also the political stability in the country. Even though the Freedom House report like considers that Kosovo is moving more towards democracy, the recent dismissal of the government by the president is showing some backward steps towards autocracy. Like it is known that Vucic and Thaci, which are the leaders that have been also in power since the wartime in 90s, 20 years ago, they are also like attempting to establish a negotiation deal that would resolve the dispute between Kosovo and Serbia, which involves exchanging territories, which can have actually spillover effects in the rest of the region, especially Bosnia. So politically, like during COVID-19, also like the people protested against the government that they cannot create like harmonious policies, and they are trying to the president is trying to sabotage the prime minister, which is still in power, because they cannot hold because the president has given now the right to another political party to create a coalition, but the case is in constitutional court to see whether it's constitutional or not. In this deadlock is also like followed up by, for instance, legal breaches, such as legal breaches in terms of privacy data, but also like in terms in terms of the high number of fines and arrests. The security situation in this case also is worsening because of mainly COVID-19. You can see that the Republic of Kosovo is attempting to arrest certain journalists, like in the north, that are with Serbian background, and the the intra-ethnic rivalry is being pursued by both, like by Serbia, but also by Kosovo. So international community is requesting them to not use inflammatory language nowadays. And to focus on COVID-19 rather than use journalists in order to promote this intra-ethnic rivalry. At the same time, we can see that de facto northern Kosovo is administered by Belgrade because the individuals that have been infected, the tests have been sent to Belgrade. Belgrade has sent paramedics in north and so on. So this shows how divided the country is still. In terms of far-right radicalization, other reports have shown like that, for instance, like this, Russia has supported like groups in northern Kosovo in order to create more destabilization, which is important to note. And they went even so far to use like a covert operation where they two Russian officials working under United Nations mission were stalling an organized crime arrest done by the Republic of Kosovo authorities, the police in the northern area. So this shows like how much like Russia is interested to actually destabilize Kosovo, but also maintain the status quo that the northern area should be remain lawless and also like highly controlled by Belgrade. At the same time, like Kosovo is suffering like from religious radicalization. Kosovo has produced more than 300 foreign fighters to Syria and Iraq. They have also had high amount of returnees, like more than 100, which is the only country so far in Europe that received so many returnees. Economically, of course, they are also like going backwards. You can see here like 5% of their GDP is predicted, according to World Bank, to go further low, which means that it might go economically. Kosovo might go to almost the war state levels of economic growth, which is very problematic, I think, because that can create further migration to Europe and refugees. External risks, we will focus. Russia, I mentioned some of their, I think, hybrid warfare tactics that they're using there. Turkey is trying to re-engineer the society as well by using like a religious identity. Gulf countries are very active, or individuals that are promoting certain types of religious radicalization. Some of the individuals that traveled, for instance, to Syria and Iraq, they both like were listening to Turkish, but also like Gulf countries imams, so we don't know like whether Turkey also has been involved in that. China is involved in creating further infrastructure like Russia in the northern area of Kosovo. The impact for Europe, the EU and NATO is that, for instance, if we look at the NATO intervention in 1999, it costed more than $4.3 trillion. And that is a really high amount that nowadays during COVID-19 and afterwards with the economic recession that will follow, none of the EU member states or US will invest so much money in troops because the capabilities are not any longer there. This also creates like further like implications for NATO because Kosovo has created its own Kosovo security force, which essentially is calling like for KFOR to leave. However, KFOR's role is very prevalent, as you can see from the high amount of security risks that derive like from far-right religious radicalization, the role of Russia in the region, and also like other Gulf and Turkish individuals and governments. So it is very important for NATO to remain in the country in order to serve as deterrent, and the EU as well, like to open the negotiations. the the risks are kind of similar also in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Like politically, we know that it's considered an autocratic state because we have three political areas that are ethnically divided. Croatians are very much like leaning towards Croatia, that is like moving like more towards nationalistic rhetoric. Then Bosniaks are leaning more towards Turkey, and then we have like the Serbs that are highly influenced by Belgrade, like Milorad Dodik, as well as by Russia. For instance, like in order to strengthen the boost of Milorad Dodik, that is influenced by Belgrade, like Russia has conducted like many actions to strengthen his electoral vote, and he has been in power for a very long time. He is known to be used like by Russia for their own political purposes. Dodik is, for instance, nowadays like stalling the NATO's stalling the action plan for NATO as well. Politically, he is attempting to, during COVID-19, he has, for instance, like created his own measures for Republika Srpska, whereas the Federation has followed other measures. This just shows how politically unstable the country is and hasn't moved forward since 20 years. Legally as well, there has been during COVID-19 like lots of surveillance and also like cases and arrests on disinformation in this case. Security-wise, I think there have been reports for both. That the far right has strengthened, for instance, especially like in Prijedor area, as well as in other towns, like which is like mainly like covering like Serbians and Croatian ethnic Serbians and ethnic Croatians living in Bosnia. Then, in terms of religious radicalization, also Bosnia has been like one of the countries that has produced high amount of foreign fighters, more than 100, but also they received many before, and those are only numbers that they are not sure. The estimations are higher. Religious radicalization remains very active there as well, like during COVID-19, because there's like sermons online that are given by radical preachers. Inter-ethnic fragility, you can see it, like for instance, like also during COVID-19, there have been no agreements about the measures as well, measures to implement them. Economically as well, they will go back for 5%, which is still quite low compared to the rest of the countries. And then societally, like the country is changing a lot. There's a high amount of societal polarization because Croatia has like furthered its reach. Croatia, for instance, has been becoming more pro-nationalistic. And also like there are certain leaders that are like collaborating with the far right in Germany and in Belgrade, so they are moving towards an inflammatory political rhetoric that mirrors the 1999. However, we need to keep in mind that Croatia is a member state of European Union and also of NATO. So if, for instance, like a conflict is rising between Croatia in Bosnia and Serbia or the Bosniaks, then Article 5 on collective defense would be activated. So that's very dangerous. And that means that the maritime waters will not be completely controlled by European countries or NATO member states, depending on who wins. Then we have like the Gulf countries and also Turkey, like influencing like societally, And Russia is very active supporting far right, but also supporting Republika Srpska, like by funding, also like bilateral visits, and so on. So the country is very unstable generally. And this impacts like the EU because the EU has been involved, but also like NATO because nowadays, like as I said, like as with Kosovo intervention, high amounts of like troops as well as financial resources have been sent to those countries, but nowadays like we don't have that capacity because already like Europe and Netherlands and US is going through through recession. So it's more important to prevent rather than react. Now we move to Northern Macedonia. So Northern Macedonia is considered to be a bit more stable because of the changes on the government. However, we need to take into account that still, like in Northern Macedonia, there have been like the Gulf countries, Turkey as well as Russia, like implementing many societal activities that are trying to re-engineer the identity. They have, for instance, Russia has worked mainly with the ethnic Macedonians, whereas like the Gulf countries and Turkey has worked mainly with Albanians. And this has been also like, for instance, like very problematic because nowadays, like we understand, like NATO has moved forward with Northern Macedonia's accession, which means that with a high amounts of foreign influence, but also with a high amount also of corruption and abuse in the country, then the data that is shared among the member states can be abused potentially. GDP-wise, economically, it is supposed to actually go 5% down, so it means that actually their levels of economic growth will decrease, which might mean that more migration can be expected by Macedonia. Lastly, like external risks, I mentioned a bit, like from geopolitical powers. In Northern Macedonia, the impact regarding NATO, especially, I mentioned, and in this case, it's important to monitor the country. Albania is also a member state of NATO, which is politically using autocratic tendencies as well due to the interferences in electoral system, but also democratic processes. Legally as well has used surveillance, and it has been criticized during COVID-19. The security is quite problematic as well because we understand like it has had the lowest number of foreign fighters to Syria and Iraq. However, like there are like active recruiters like in the country, especially like working with children, and that is very dangerous because they are trying essentially not only in the north but also in the south to change the identities, the Albanian identity more towards like religious fundamentalist Islamic identity rather than the moderate identity that the Albanians used to have. So this needs to be countered, and otherwise then it will become problematic in the future. Albania is also known to be highly corrupt, and organized crime is quite high, so it's important also to understand that abuses in the system, for instance, like for NATO, might be problematic because we have seen an incident where the data was publicly made available of individuals working for the missions, and those kind of leaks can cause damages in long term to NATO. External, like economically, it will also like be hit. External risks, so I mentioned most of them, but Russia is trying also like to influence political leaders. Turkey, for instance, has influenced political leaders that it's like unprecedented in history. Turkey has established a memorial in Tirana, commemorating the fallen victims from the revolution in Turkey. This is very problematic because this also implies that they are considering Albania as a Turkish land. Therefore, they are using their own home memorials, as in Turkey, also in Albania. It's important to understand those, especially like the economic downturn, because we know that migration might increase, and with migration also we might have further organized crime. Lastly, Montenegro. Montenegro politically, as I said, like is considered now an autocratic state from or a hybrid regime, which is not democratic, from Freedom House. There have been lots of criticism regarding the legal situation, treatment of freedom of expression, freedom of movement, the high number of arrests, and other measures. Security-wise, organized crime is very high, but also like religious radicalization. Communities are very active. The Serbian also far right is being active, the same like promoted by Russia, but also by the Serbian Orthodox Church. Serbian Orthodox priests have been the only ones that have also asked to not respect the rules of COVID-19 and the measurements. Montenegro's like growth will decline for 5% as well, which is like very low. So it means very high. So it means that the country might actually have problems, especially like with paying back China for the infrastructural highway that they have signed a deal, and that might actually create a debt trap in Montenegro. The debt trap also it could be also in the port that has been bought by China, where there's a clause that if Montenegro cannot pay then for 90 years, the port can be used by China, which means that China will in turn receive a military strategic point like in Adriatic Sea, which is very problematic as China nowadays considers Europe and the West as competitor. Russia at the same time attempts to intervene, as I said, via the Serbian Orthodox Church, but also via their own individuals. And you have Europe. It could impact Europe because in long term, as a NATO member state as well, the high corruption and abuse might also impact, for instance, the intelligence sharing of NATO member states. Okay, to conclude, we could see also far-right links with the rest of the European countries, like for instance with Germany, and there's also Bulgaria, Croatia, and so on. So there's a trend that most of the states during COVID-19, like also in Europe, it's showing they are using more the far-right rhetoric. So is Europe re-extremization? And is Russia and China actually winning in Europe, which they are aiming to undermine the competitor to create more destability and perhaps move away from the idea of the European Union that exists today. Conclusions. The internal risks, we mentioned that they are quite high in the Western Balkans in terms of radicalization, organized crime, democratic deficit, deepening of frozen conflicts, human rights violations, economic slowdown, and identity reengineering. External risks have been strengthened and have been seen by the aids that have been given, mainly by China, Russia, Turkey. They are using mainly debt trap, disinformation, societal reengineering, radicalization, and all those lead to hybrid warfare in the region. So it's important that mitigation strategies are used to defend Europe, NATO, and the EU by preventing and countering instability in the region, to counterbalance geopolitical competitive powers and increase stability. So we can prevent further refugees, for instance, to Europe, and also like essentially a new potential conflict, like for instance in Bosnia or Kosovo. Mitigation strategies. There's mitigation strategies that can be done in order to prevent this instability in 5 domains. In political domain, it's important to strengthen critical academics and provide use credible voices. In rule of law domain, it's important to fight against corruption, so then you win the hearts and minds of the people. As if a European nation state is attempting to fight corruption, then this actually resonates a lot with people. And the people are tired of the corruption in the state and of the same political elites. So then essentially a change may follow up if you win the hearts and minds of people. Security. You first, as security as a state, one can actually monitor the strategic risks for early warning and prevention strategies, like by different geopolitical powers, but also internal risks. So external risks by geopolitical powers, but also internal risks like based on different domains of the state. It's important to strengthen KFOR and EU4 with more troops, consider sanctions for arms export, provide education in prison in order to prevent further radicalization, separate terrorists from organized crime prisoners, because that can create like another complex phenomena within the prisons that can actually like destabilize those countries. Strengthen border control and create military and security partnerships. Navy as well is important to be incorporated in order to raise awareness of the potential scenarios in the Western Balkans. And you need to create an assessment of credible leaders in the country, because they have been highly influenced by geopolitical powers, either Russia, China, or the Gulf countries, which are essentially working against the democratic liberal states and regimes. Economically, it's important to invest further in rural areas to win the hearts and minds of the people. And societally, it is very important to actually have some strategical communication campaigns to promote peaceful coexistence, interethnic but also religious. And also to create some videos, because videos can influence more the local communities, and also to reach essentially individuals that are in rural areas. Those are, and then there's certain conditions, but I think I will stop here and I will take some questions now. Can everybody hear me? Hello?